Welcome to this Asia Global podcast brought to you by the Asia Global Institute at the University of Hong Kong. I'm your host, Alejandro Reyes, the Institute's Director of Knowledge Dissemination. In our programs here in Hong Kong and online, and in the content that we produce, we focus on presenting Asian perspectives on global issues. Subscribe to Asia Global Online, our weekly digital journal, by going to the Asia Global Online or the Asia Global Institute website. And follow us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, or YouTube. This podcast is part of our Meet the Authors series, where we have a conversation with contributors to Asia Global Online and other publications of the Institute. Joining me now from Manchester, England in the UK is Yuhei Inoue. Yuhei is a reader, which is equivalent to associate professor in sport management in the Department of Economics, Policy and International Business at Manchester Metropolitan University in the UK. In his research, he seeks to promote how sports events and organizations may contribute to the promotion of personal and social well-being. He's taught previously in the United States. He has a doctorate. His original degree was from the University of Tsukuba in sociology in Japan. Then he has an MA in sports management from The Ohio State University and a doctorate in business administration from the Fox School of Business at Temple University in Philadelphia. And he's previously taught at the University of Memphis and the University of Minnesota in Minneapolis, St. Paul. So welcome, Yuhei. It's lovely to have you join us, and Happy New Year.
Yeah, Happy New Year. Thank you so much for having me.
Yes. Now, Yuhei is quite prolific. He's written a lot of papers on sports issues. He has published over 45 articles in leading journals, including a special issue of he was guest co-editor of a special issue of the Journal of Sport Management entitled Transformative Sports Service Research, Linking Sports Services with Well-Being. He's written about athlete activism. He's done work on the European Super League, which is an interesting topic, and about sport in the time of the pandemic. So it's very interesting. Now, in the Asia Global Online article that he co-wrote with Steve Swanson, who's a senior lecturer at Deakin University in Australia, they focused on the Olympics, the delayed 2020 Olympic Games. Now, they wrote about how whenever a country hosts a major sports event, such as the Olympics, the organizers highlight the legacy of putting on such an expensive extravaganza. So the Tokyo 2020 Games, which were delayed, so they happened in 2021, were meant to promote the values of diversity and inclusion among Japanese people. So Yuhei, you and Steve conducted surveys to assess the social impact of the Games, and you had done similar studies for London in 2012 at the London Olympics. Now, you issued a final report for the IOC Olympic Study Center, from which you received a grant to do this research, co-authored along with Steve with Masayuki Yoshida of Hosei University in Japan. So you wrote that in that report that the Olympic Games provide an important platform for promoting diversity and inclusion, and that the research project aimed to understand the role the Olympic Games can play in promoting universal attitudes towards, for shorthand, D&I among young adults. The surveys were administered to young adult residents aged 18 to 25 of London in relation to the London Olympics, and then the similar cohort in Tokyo before and after the Tokyo Olympics. Now, the results indicated that positive perceptions of both Olympic core values related to D&I existed for each set of respondents. And the pre and post-Olympic surveys in Tokyo further showed that perceptions of both the two Olympic core values significantly increased because of the shared experience of witnessing the Olympic Games. And that's just a long preamble to set things up. So I'm wondering, Yuhei, we can start just if you could maybe summarize the key findings here. I just very briefly touched on this idea that the core values did increase, showed an increase before and after the Tokyo Games.
Yes, yeah, of course. So, yeah, essentially, as you said, we did survey with London local people and also Tokyo local people in relation to their perceptions of the Olympic Games and also their values and attitudes toward diversity and inclusion. And what we found is, first of all, just hosting the Olympic Game does not necessarily increase people's attitude toward diversity and inclusion. So just hosting that, and there is not necessarily a big difference in local people, perceptions or attitude toward diversity and inclusion. But still, there's a way for Olympic Games to promote diversity and inclusion. And that's when local people strongly identify or feeling a part of the Olympic game community. So when they develop a strong sense of identification, again, sense of oneness with Olympic Games, then they feel that diversity and inclusion values are important to the Olympic Games. And this perception of the value in turn promote positive attitude toward diversity and inclusion. So we are not saying that all the local people increase their diversity and inclusion related attitude, but it's more that some people who became identified with Olympic game increase these attitudes.
Right. So tell us then, how did you come to do this study? In other words, what was the motivation for trying to find this particular aspect, the social impact, if you will, of an Olympic Games? Because of course, since you did study at the London Olympics, you've been at it a long time. So we go back to 2012 for the London Olympics, right?
Yeah, so just for clarification, we did study on the London 2012, but we did study in 2021.
Right.
So we asked people's perceptions about London 2012 after 9 years.
So right.
I didn't necessarily,
so it's not necessarily, okay.
Yeah,
that's a good.
But you're right, I have been doing research on the social impact of sports for a long time.
Yeah.
But this particular study, this was motivated in part by my background and experience. So I'm originally from Japan, as you mentioned. So I spent my first 20 years of my life in Japan and then moved to the US for my postgraduate study and now living in the UK. So through this experience of living in foreign countries, I became more and more aware that Japan is lagging behind compared to other countries in terms of the promotion of diversity and inclusion. Now, Japanese people are not necessarily open toward people from different backgrounds, or Japanese policies are not necessarily flexible toward people who have a different background and so forth. So I have this increased sense of issue in Japan. And also I have been doing research on the social impact of sports and sporting events and organizations. So I want to combine these two and examine how Olympic Games, which is the largest sporting event in the world, can change local people's attitudes, Japanese people's attitudes, so that they become more inclusive and more understanding of diversity and inclusion. So that's kind of the background of why I came up with this study idea.
Now, this is interesting because, of course, I don't know, it seems to me when I was growing up, and I was born in 1964, so that's the momentous Tokyo Olympics.
Right.
And all through when I was young, you would have a warm and fuzzy feeling about the Olympics, right? You would always feel, oh, this is wonderful that all these different countries would come together. I actually have an Olympian. I was originally from the Philippines, an Olympian in my family who participated in 4 Olympics, I believe, in the sport of basketball. So you would have this kind of warm and fuzzy, the togetherness. And I note that in 2021, I believe the Olympic motto was sort of updated, right? It used to be faster, higher, stronger. And now it's faster, higher, stronger together, right? So there's this sense that the Olympic movement and the IOC, the International Olympic Committee, really wants to underscore that issue of inclusion, that there's diversity in the world. I mean, you just look at the Olympic rings. I mean, the Olympic rings are also meant to show the interlocking rings, that there's unity in diversity. So I think it's fascinating to try to look into this idea. Well, is it skin deep? In other words, what is the real impact of the movement? Because of course, nowadays, maybe older people like myself, we tend to dismiss the Olympics a little bit as maybe become too commercial. It's all the sponsorships and all those sorts of things. I'm wondering how you stand on that kind of, I guess, that debate that goes on today, whether the Olympic movement continues to mean something still today in the way that it did, say, in '64 and when I, at Tokyo and in other Olympics in that period.
Yes, I think that's an excellent question. I still think Olympics stands on these key social values, such as unity in diversity, and IOC and the local Olympic committees make effort to promote these principles or values. But I think people are more and more aware the cost that are involved with hosting Olympic Games. For example, for hosting Tokyo 2020 Games, it costs Japan and Tokyo for over 15 billion US dollars. Right. So if there's a lot of cost, and then people expect more benefit from this, and then if they don't observe this tangible benefit from hosting a game, then they may have a negative attitude towards Olympic Games. Right. So I don't think it's not necessarily about the function that Olympic Games do not necessarily have a principle anymore. I think Olympic Games have a principles, but then people have a higher perceptions of these costs or potential negative impact of hosting games, and then do not necessarily recognize sometimes about the positive impact that come from hosting these games.
Because I guess if you read the Wall Street Journal and those kinds of magazines, it'll always talk about, well, what's the commercial value, right, to a host city or a host country for an Olympics. Now, let's talk a bit about the recommendations that you and your colleagues had in your final report, and there were 3 recommendations. That there should be recognition that not all Olympic Games are equally viewed as representing the core values in relation to diversity and inclusion. Second, to implement marketing and communication strategies to increase residents' awareness, residents' sense of identification with the Olympic Games. And third, to consider the dominant cultural values of a host country in promoting the core values in relation to diversity and inclusion through the Olympic Games. I want you to talk a bit about those, what exactly are you meaning? Because this is essentially an advice to Olympic organizers of the future.
Yeah, that's right. So for the first recommendations, again, as you mentioned, it's about to recognize that not all Olympic Games are equally viewed as representing the core values in relation to diversity and inclusion. So what we found in this project is London 2012 Olympic Games was substantially more representing the diversity and inclusion values compared to the Tokyo 2020 Games, from the perceptions of the local people.
Right.
And for the Tokyo surveys, there has been increase in these perceptions of diversity and inclusion values before and after the game, but still the post-Olympic level, that's lower compared to the perception of diversity and inclusion in relation to the London 2012 Games. So this means, again, just hosting the Olympic Games does not necessarily mean that people think Olympic Games have a close association with diversity and inclusion values. But it's more about the effort of the Olympic organizer to just showcase how diversity and inclusion is important. If people are not aware of this message, then they don't feel like diversity and inclusion have a close relationship to the Olympic Games. And based on findings, I think London Games did a better job than Tokyo Games because of the perceptions of the local people. So
yeah. What might that, so again, just as a observer and that doesn't really know much about these things, but I would have guessed that the pandemic possibly was maybe the differentiating factor for Tokyo. But also, if you go back to 2012, that was the Diamond Jubilee year of Queen Elizabeth. She's celebrating her 70th year on the throne this year. And so there was a kind of warm and fuzzy atmosphere in the UK in that year. People might recall that at the opening ceremony, there was footage of the Queen purportedly parachuting into the opening ceremony with James Bond. So it was a different UK at the time. I mean, I guess a pre-Brexit UK and that sort of thing. Do you think that the pandemic was really this differentiating factor then for the Tokyo Games?
Yes, I think the pandemic is one of the main factors about people's perceptions of Olympic game in Tokyo. Because based on some of the results, not necessarily from our report, but also some of the report, before the pandemic, close to 90% of Japanese people supported the hosting of the Olympic Games. But then after the pandemic, this changed, and the majority of people opposed of hosting the Olympic Games in the summer 2021 because of the concern for this coronavirus spread, but also perceived cost of hosting the game. There are more issues with hosting and also more money that are involved because of all the control measures for pandemics. So, this essentially changed, I believe, people's attitude toward the Olympic Games. Essentially, that declined people's identification towards the Olympic Games, and in turn, that led to a decline in the perceptions of Olympic and how Olympics are related to diversity and inclusion and so forth. So, yeah, I think there's a big impact of the pandemic on how people's perceptions on that.
Now, I find it interesting also that you focused very much on young people. Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering whether you looked into older cohorts and whether you have a sense of whether older people might have felt differently or might have had more nostalgia and then therefore more sense of belonging or inclusion to the Olympic movement than the young people did.
Yeah, so in this study, we specifically focused on young people for two reasons. First, based on previous research, we know young people are more flexible about changing their attitude because once we get older, then we are kind of difficult to change our attitude towards, for example, diversity inclusion. So that's why we focus on young people. And also, young people is the future for the country. So if the young people become more aware of these diversity inclusion values, then when they become a leader, they get older, they can make changes in society. So that's why we focus on young people. So based on this study, we are not able to say whether older people had a different perceptions. But I can speak based on my experience with, just talking with someone we know, someone I know. For example, my parents, both of them were now in their 70s, and they experienced Tokyo 1964 games. So for them, Tokyo 1964 game was very important. That changed everything for Japan. So even during the pandemic, when I spoke with them, they were still wanted to have the Tokyo Olympic Games go ahead because they remember about the past. Then they were really excited about the Tokyo hosting the games again. So actually, indeed, all the people, especially in the 60s, 70s, who experienced this Tokyo 1964 in the youth, might have a more positive attitude toward Olympic Games.
Right. Interesting. Now, have you looked into some of the other Olympics? Because again, if I think back to Olympics that I remember, and what I perceived the sort of domestic attitudes towards the Olympics in those host cities. So, I go back to say Munich in 1972 and the terrorist attack, and that certainly shaped attitudes. Not only in Germany, but certainly around the world towards the Olympics and what it means and other issues, human rights issues. In Montreal, where I'm nominally from as a Canadian, in 1976, there was the local enthusiasm was really soured by the cost overruns. And then, of course, when the Olympics in Montreal opened, the Olympic Tower wasn't even completed. It was a little bit of a stub, basically telling the world that we ran out of money, And then, of course, Beijing, in my mind, was a different kind of Olympics because there was a real palpable, strong spirit of unity among people of China. And even here in Hong Kong, which, of course, is not that long ago, 2008. And of course, now we're experiencing a kind of different dynamic between Hong Kong and mainland China. Yeah, so I'm wondering, how do you think that the Olympics, because of all these different factors, that there's something to be said about perhaps the model of putting on the Olympics, in other words, moving it around to different places, that there's a big flaw in that maybe, I know there's been some idea that maybe it should just go to Athens and be there permanently, potentially, that maybe there is a flaw in moving it around because you do get these different attitudes, different competencies in organizing this very complex event. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting question, and there are many answers to that. But my focus of the research is about social impact.
Right.
And social impact is typically defined based on impact toward local people or impact on the host community resident. So if, let's say, we do Olympic Games within only one city, for example, Athens, then I would say the social impact is very limited because always Athens receive this social impact.
Right.
And there won't be any other benefit beyond these host cities, host community, and so forth. So I understand these issues of cost and also concerns for building new facilities and so forth. maybe this model of hosting the Olympic Games in the different cities may not work anymore. But I still support this idea of having a multiple host cities for over the years, and hosting that in different cities. Again, if we think about social impact, it's about impact on local resident, and we should provide this impact to different countries, different cities, and so forth. So that's my perspective on that.
But then, of course, there's the global impact, right? In terms, particularly if you think about, the pandemic now. And I know you've looked into this idea of the pandemic perhaps being, or sports being a way to revive kind of people's spirits, revive a sense of well-being, to bring people together after this pandemic. Now, in fact, we have two big sporting events coming up this year, and there are probably others, but I'm referring to the Winter Olympics in Beijing in really a couple of weeks' time, and then of course we have the World Cup in Qatar at the end of the year. But both events are already so charged with I wouldn't say controversy, but there are geopolitics hovering over them. There are questions about corruption relating to the World Cup in Qatar. Again, I find, it's important that we have these events because they can stir up senses of the sense of the values of diversity, inclusion amid diversity. But then on the surface, what we see now is more division that seems to be coming out of these events. I'm wondering then, what are your thoughts on this year in particular, which would seem to be a very signal year for major sports events?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question. And also in terms of diversity inclusion, these two events are interesting case as well, because as you say, on one hand, these events may focus on this diversity inclusion values. They say, this event can provide opportunity for people to become more diverse, inclusive. But then there's all about human rights issues that have been seen critical by many other countries. So a similar case I can think about is a Sochi 2014 in Russia. There is actually a study that was published in 2017. And this study looked at social media reactions of the Sochi 2014, both the domestic audience and also international audience. And the study found that these two audiences reacted to the Sochi 2014 in very different way.
Right.
People in Russia had a positive perceptions of the Sochi 2014. They thought that provided a positive impact on the community, that provided some of the opportunity to solve issues. But then international audience were very critical of the event, even during the game. They say, okay, these games actually promote maybe opposition towards, for example, LGBTQ rights because of Russia's position towards these issues. So I think there could be probably two different perspectives on this. For example, Beijing, local people may feel that, okay, Olympic Games have a large impact on community, and maybe that can increase their interest in foreign culture because they see all these athletes come from other countries and so forth. But then international audience, they say, oh, it's not about diversity and inclusion. It's not necessarily about solving social issues. It's actually increasing social issues because of the tension that you mentioned. But also there's a contradiction between the value of diversity and inclusion and this human rights issue. So yeah, I think my point here is yeah, there will be probably a very different reactions
Right.
Between the domestic people and the international audiences.
Right. Now, the idea that sports can bring people together, of course, is a really powerful notion. Although I guess, in recent weeks, if you think about the controversy over Novak Djokovic in Australia,
Yes, yeah.
This particular sports event seemed to have divided people more than brought them together. And of course, people get very passionate about football. So the World Cup and the nationalism that gets stirred up is often really, sometimes can be quite toxic. But what then of future Olympic organizers? Because we've got Paris coming up in 2024, right? And I think Brisbane is already in the future. I would think that given a lot of the difficulties involved in putting out the Olympics, with all the geopolitics that gets involved and the complexity, and perhaps the return, the social impact, maybe not being as great as one might have hoped because of those factors. I mean, if I were a city, I might think, well, why bother? Why bother to put your hat in the ring to try to organize one of these Olympics, an Olympics? I'm wondering what you would say, to an organizer, because I mean, as a believer in the Olympic spirit and the values, to try to encourage cities to continue to make bids and to, despite all the hassles involved.
Yes, so I think the key point is that typically we just focus only on cost of hosting the games. Olympic game cost, let's say over $10 billion, $20 billion. But then another perspective is that these are the investments that make a positive impact on community. It's not necessarily a cost, it's an investment for the future. If we see this is an investment, then it's the issues of management. Right? So if we use money for hosting the game, but if we manage the game well, then there is going to be a positive impact on the community. So based on research and based on many examples, we have become more and more aware that just hosting the Olympic game doesn't provide positive impact. But if we are able to leverage this opportunity, if we are able to manage the Olympic Games, and if we reduce the cost, but then also tries to use this investment to provide a more benefit for the community, then the Olympic Games can provide value to them. So I think it's more and more important perspective is about investment perspective or management perspective, and how we can best utilize this opportunity to promote a positive impact on the community.
So that's kind of where you come in, because this is your focus as a sports management, business administration. In many ways, it's like the Peter Ueberroth kind of Mitt Romney ideal, right? If you run it correctly and competently, keep the budget and raise enough, then once you dot the I's and cross the T's, the rest will happen, right? The social impact will be there. You want to just be competent in the administration. So this is kind of an important area, I think, important idea, connecting the competency in the administration and the management to the dividends that you might get in society.
Yes, you're right. And again, sports, I believe, has the potential of making positive impact. But how we cultivate the potential really depends on the people's work. or the ability of management. Right? If we do well on managing this potential, then there will be a large impact. If we fail on doing that, then there won't be a benefit. So yeah, I think it's the issues of management. It's the issue of a good administration that make difference in this respect.
So tell me about your thoughts on sports as a kind of remedy for the pandemic, as a way for us to bring the world together. Because of course, the global response to the pandemic, the cooperation that we've seen has been pretty weak. And for the most part, global response is not really well coordinated. What are your thoughts on kind of, going forward? Do you have any kind of interest, any ideas about what we could do in terms of using sport as an antidote to this public health crisis?
Yes. So sports, again, can attract interest of people or has the potential to connect people from a different background. So that can be a resource for the society to put more resources, to put more capital in addressing issues like pandemic. Again, there's a potential here, but then there's a management of how we can use sports as a way to tackle this pandemic, or maybe promote this mental or physical health in time also crisis such as pandemic. And actually, I have written paper in relation to how sports may be able to promote well-being in time of crisis. And we said there are 5 different resources that sports, events, and organizations can promote, including social support, relatedness or belonging, and also purpose and meaning, and more the in-group norms of supporting these disaster relief effort and so forth, and also trust. And we call this a sprint pathway. So if sports are able to manage these resources, and then that has a positive impact on well-being in time of crisis, and also that can facilitate the disaster relief effort. But then organizations, policymakers not able to use these resources well, then there won't be a much difference here. So yeah, I think management would be important.
In an odd sort of way, you're saying that a sports event, a global sports event in particular, can have the same effect as just doing sports can have on an individual's well-being. And I think that's a fascinating way of kind of looking at it.
That's we typically think doing sports, participating in sports activities, and we can increase health and well-being. But more and more, there's a research on actually watching sports events or attending sports events or supporting sports events can increase our health and well-being as well. Now, again, I'm kind of emphasizing about the management perspective of how we can do that. So you're actually spectating, that can be actually a big resource for society to promote well-being.
Right. And so couch potatoes can actually be benefiting. If you're sitting in your couch and watching sports events, that could actually be helpful for your state of mind and your sense of inclusion.
Yes, that's right. But then what I would say is not necessarily just watching the game alone.
Yes.
If we watch the game with other people and we are able to kind of share the passion about supporting sporting events, supporting sport team, then sports can have a collective power to promote health and well-being. So that's a kind of big difference.
And also, and also you've also written about people's connection to sports brands as well, and that can also be an important part of what we're talking about.
Yes, that's right. It's not just about sporting events or sport teams, but being a fan or supporter of athlete or sporting brand such as Nike. That can be actually some community benefit, because we are part of this big group that supports the same brand, and that is associated with a range of different resources that can promote health and well-being.
Right. So, yeah, hey, let's to close. Let's just talk a bit about your background. So, you grew up in Japan, and then what? So, what drew you to the United States, and what drew you, in fact, to your interest in making a career out of researching sports, the sports world, and sports management?
Yes. So, first of all, the reason why I moved to the US, that's closely related to my passion for sports.
Right.
I was doing sports over the year in Japan. And actually, in Japan, I was playing American football.
Wow. Okay.
So it's probably a unique sport.
And what was your position as
I was a wide receiver.
Oh, right. Okay.
And in my sophomore year at the university, at Tsukuba, we went to the US to join a football camp hosted by the Princeton University. And that was my first time to be outside of Japan, except for Taiwan. So that was probably the first long trip. And at the time, I was amazed about the sporting environment in the US. It's a very different environment with what I was used to. But also through this experience and through participating in this football camp with as an American student, and then I kind of felt that I'm a part of this community. Even though I come from a different part of the world, I was able to develop this sense of connection with American students. And I didn't know that before going there, but I feel like, okay, there's a good connection. I was able to speak with them. I was able to interact. So at the time, I kind of saw the power of sports personally, kind of creating this broader connection. And also I saw this big environment, sports environment in the US. So I wanted to study more about sports. And I wanted to study sports in the US. So that's kind of why I decided to move to the US to do my postgraduate study. So that's a kind of big reason why I moved.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm just fascinated by the idea of you in Japan wanting to play American football, because of course, Japan normally, I would guess most young people would be baseball fanatics more than American football would seem something really quite exotic. How did that happen?
Yes, actually, American football is one of the more popular university sports in Japan. There's no professional sports, but at the university level, that is a popular sport. And I didn't play American football, before the university, but then when I went to the University of Tsukuba, I saw this big group of American football players who's actively recruiting, these new players, and I thought, it's very interesting. I might be probably want to be part of this. So yeah, it's just about the luck, I just saw this big group of American football player, and I had some interest in this, and I joined the football club. So yeah, that's about it.
So did you actually get to play when you were in the United States in university at all? Or?
Yeah, no. Once I moved to the US, no, it's just a different level.
Yes,
it's just so high. But I engaged with the football, as a intern for athletic department. So engaging the promotion, the marketing of the football team and so forth. But not playing. Yeah, it was a very different environment there. Yeah.
Yes. Well, you were doing your graduate work, so it's not like you could have played Ohio State. The Ohio State is, of course, the Buckeyes are a very important team, American football team in the United States, and you must have enjoyed following the Buckeyes when you were there.
Yeah, and you're right. And as probably they have a 100,000 seating stadium on campus. It's probably the largest than any other stadium I ever knew. And actually, that can also connect to my research, because when I attended this football game by Ohio State University, before, I was homesick, moving to the US, and, I didn't have many friends, so I was lonely and so forth. But once I attended this football game and I cheered Ohio State Buckeye, I kind of feel like I was part of this big group again, because we support the same team and people see me as another fan rather than a foreigner. And that kind of increased my sense of connection with the university or the community. And I kind of wanted to do research more on this, how sports can actually create this sense of community, sense of connections. And yeah, so kind of that led me to actually research this kind of social impact of sports. So.
Interesting. And now, of course, you're living in the UK, which, of course, has a kind of different sporting universe than one has in the United States. So I'm wondering, what is your sporting life now in the United Kingdom? Because it's not about American football; it's about football.
Now it's about soccer. It's football. I'm learning more about the sports, but it's fascinating. Because in the UK, every city or every town, even small, has their own football club, a soccer club. And that plays a central role in the community. People support their football club, they go to the events, they try to connect with other people through football events and so forth. So even though it's a different sport, it's not American football, I still see the same functions of how sporting organizations play a central role in the community. And by being there, I feel like I'm the part of this big community. I'm supporting the same team, and then I feel like I'm integrated into this community and country, so forth. So it's very interesting. But I see just probably the same role of sports in society.
Right. But of course, you're in one of the most famous cities for football that has not just one, but two. And so I guess I have to ask you which one you support. Which one?
Yeah. So
that's an all-important question for Mancunians.
I have to say Manchester City.
Right.
They good for me. I've been to many games since I moved. They have a strong image, a strong brand image. They are very welcoming to many different fans. So I became more and more supporting Manchester City.
And what's it like now during the pandemic, with the pandemic, the end looking like it's in sight? Are fixtures back on, and are you going to matches, to games?
Yes, I have attended Manchester City match, and actually at the game, it's almost a full stadium capacity. I think there's over 40,000 people. So I think even during the pandemic, people are willing to go back to the football game, and they're supporting the game. And while I was at the game, I actually didn't notice the impact of the pandemic. People are essentially reacting the same way. So I think the situation is very different in different countries, but at least in the UK, seems like a sport is attracting the same kind of audience before and after.
Now, are folks wearing masks, or is it just like any other? It's
no mask. At the time, I think that's before the new
Omicron.
Omicrons, but at the time it was November, and people didn't wear mask. They're just supporting the team. It's very crowded, so didn't see much difference there.
Right. Now, tell me, how have you fared in general, you and your family, through the pandemic as a teacher? What's it been like? How did you find it? And are things fairly back to normal now for you?
I think it's getting close to normal, I would say. But it still was challenging because we moved to the UK in 2019.
Right.
the fall. And after 6 or 7 months, then this pandemic happened. So before actually being able to travel the UK or Europe and so forth, this pandemic happened. So we are actually, most of the time we are staying at home. So that has been challenging, but I think in the summer we did some travel. Hopefully in the spring and so forth, now we can go back to traveling, meeting new people and so forth. So I think the situation is getting better. Yeah.
Right. Now, I guess to close, let me ask you this question. With the World Cup coming up, which team do you support at the World Cup? You're living in the UK, so there's England. I think Japan is in the World Cup.
Yeah, I think it's still haven't decided. I believe Japan in the final.
Right.
Yeah, but yeah, I still have to say Japan if they are able to compete at the World Cup because of my identity there. But no, of course, England, that's a big team for me too. But if I have to pick one team, it's gonna be Japan.
Well, there we go. Well, Yuhei, thank you so much. This has been lovely. It's really interesting research that you do. And I think, going forward, I think it'll be interesting to see how the Olympic movement continues to evolve, particularly with all the challenges involved in organizing such a big event. And as you say, I think it's an interesting area to think about how competence in management can actually have the social impact that the Olympic movement would like to have in these various cities. It's a fascinating connection between two different disciplines, if you will. So thank you very much. I commend to our listeners and readers and viewers to Yuhei's article with Steve Swanson in Asia Global Online and appeared in August. It's on our website. And again, please follow us on social media. And so again, Yuhei, thank you very much and Happy New Year and good luck.
Yeah, thanks so much, Al. I really enjoy conversation with you.
Thanks very much.